Diane Powell rubbed her tired eyes as she walked quickly through the busy hallways of Atlanta International Airport. The large overhead signs pointed to Gate C-36, where her connecting flight to Washington, D.C. would leave in just 25 minutes. After visiting her elderly parents in Chicago for the weekend, she was now rushing to make it to the important judicial conference where she was scheduled to give the opening speech tomorrow morning. At 38 years old, Diane had worked incredibly hard to become one of the youngest federal judges in the country. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, she had fought against stereotypes and barriers her entire life. First in her family to go to college, she graduated at the top of her class from law school and worked her way up through the legal system with determination and brilliance that impressed everyone she met. 3 years ago, she was appointed to the federal bench, a position she took very seriously. Today, however, no one would guess she was a distinguished judge. After the overnight flight from Chicago, Diane wore comfortable clothes, simple black leggings, a navy blue Northwestern University sweatshirt, and white sneakers. Her curly hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup. With her small carry-on rolling behind her and just a plain purse over her shoulder, she looked like any other tired traveler trying to make a connection. The airport was especially crowded this Monday morning. Business travelers in suits mixed, with families heading on vacation. The smell of coffee and fast food filled the air as Diane passed a row of restaurants. Announcements echoed through the terminal, calling passengers to various gates and reminding everyone not to leave bags unattended. Diane checked her watch again. 20 minutes until boarding closed. She walked faster, weaving between slower travelers, careful not to bump into anyone. She had already checked her larger suitcase with her formal clothes for the conference, carrying only the essentials in her small bag. At the same time, near the security checkpoint at Terminal C, Officer Kevin Martinez sipped his coffee while scanning the crowd. He was 32 years old and had worked airport security for 7 years. With short black hair and a serious expression, he took pride in his job protecting travelers. His partner, Officer Lisa Benson, a blonde woman in her late 20s, approached him with her radio in hand. "Just got a tip from Terminal B security," Officer Benson said in a low voice. They said to watch for a suspicious woman, African-American, about 5'6", wearing dark pants and a blue top, carrying a small suitcase. Apparently she was acting nervous and avoided the security cameras. Officer Martinez straightened up, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the crowd. "Any more details?" "No, that's all they said. They think she might be heading to our terminal for a connecting flight." The description was vague and could match dozens of travelers, but both officers began watching more carefully. They had been trained to take all security tips seriously, especially in a high-traffic airport like Atlanta. Diane checked the departure board and felt relieved. Her flight was still on time and she would make it if she hurried. As she rounded the corner toward her gate, she bumped into a man who had stopped suddenly to check his phone. "I'm so sorry," Diane said, steadying herself. The man barely looked up, just waved his hand dismissively and continued his conversation. Diane continued, on her way, walking even faster now. Officer Martinez nudged his partner. "Look there, woman in blue top and black pants moving quickly." Officer Benson nodded. "She matches the description. Let's check it out." Without further discussion, they began moving toward Diane, weaving through the crowd with practiced efficiency. They positioned themselves to intercept her just before she reached the moving walkway that would take her to her gate. "Ma'am, we need you to stop right there," Officer Martinez called out firmly, his hand moving toward his handcuffs as a precaution. Diane stopped, surprised by the sudden command. She looked around, not sure at first that they were talking to her. "Yes, you, ma'am. Step aside, please," Officer Benson said, gesturing to a less crowded area near the wall. Diane's heart began to beat faster, but she remained calm. As a judge, she knew her rights and understood proper police procedure. She also knew that as a black woman, she needed to be extremely careful in how she responded. "Is there a problem, officers?" she asked calmly, stepping to the side as directed. Several travelers slowed down to watch what was happening. A young man nearby took out his phone and began recording discreetly. "We need to see some identification," Officer Martinez said, his tone stern and official. Diane nodded. "I'd be happy to show my ID, but may I ask why I'm being stopped?" "I'm trying to catch a connecting flight that boards very soon." The officers exchanged a quick glance. "We received information about someone matching your description, officer," Benson said vaguely. "Your ID, please." Diane reached slowly for her purse. "I'm reaching for my wallet," she explained, keeping her movements deliberate and visible. Officer Martinez seemed impatient. "Just hurry up and show us your ID." "I understand you're doing your job," Diane said calmly, "but I would appreciate knowing the specific reason I'm being detained. As a citizen, I have that right." Something in her educated tone seemed to irritate Officer Benson. "Look, we don't have time for a legal debate. Either cooperate or we'll have to take further action." More people had stopped to watch now. An older couple whispered to each other. A businessman in a suit frowned at the scene. Diane tried again. "I'm not debating, officers. I'm simply asking for the reason." Before she could finish, Officer Martinez stepped forward and grabbed her arm. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "What?" "This is completely unnecessary," Diane said, her voice rising slightly in surprise. "You're being uncooperative," Officer Martinez said, pulling Diane's arm behind her back and reaching for his handcuffs. Diane was stunned. "I was just asking a question. This is inappropriate and excessive." Officer Benson stepped closer, blocking the view of some onlookers. "You people always make things difficult," she muttered, just loud enough for Diane and those nearby to hear. The racial undertone of the comment was not lost on Diane or the growing audience. Several more phones were out now, recording the incident. "I have done nothing wrong," Diane said clearly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I am simply trying to catch my flight to Washington, D.C. for a work conference." Officer Martinez ignored her explanation and continued to secure the handcuffs. The cold metal closed around Diane's wrists with a clicking sound that seemed to echo in her ears. In the commotion, Diane's purse slipped from her shoulder and fell to the ground, spilling some of its contents. Her wallet landed open, revealing her federal judicial identification badge with its distinctive seal. A man in the crowd, Sam Washington, was standing close enough to see the ID. He was a retired police officer and immediately recognized the significance of the badge. "Officers," Sam called out, his deep voice carrying over the noise of the terminal, "I believe you're detaining a federal judge." Officer Martinez scoffed. "Sir, please step back and don't interfere." But Sam persisted. "Look at her ID on the ground. That's a federal judicial badge." Officer Benson glanced down at the fallen wallet, her expression changing as she saw the official identification. She bent down to look more closely, then straightened up quickly. "Kevin," she said quietly to her partner, "take a look at this." Officer Martinez, still holding Diane's arm, looked down at the ID. His face paled as he read the credentials. "The Honorable Judge Diane Powell, United States Court of Appeals." The crowded airport terminal suddenly seemed very quiet to Diane. She stood there in handcuffs, a federal judge being publicly detained for no valid reason, with dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras recording every moment. And then, cutting. Through the tension, a new voice called out, "Judge Powell, what's happening here?" Gregory Mason, the head of airport security, pushed through the gathering crowd. He immediately recognized one of the most respected federal judges in the country. A judge whose recent ruling on an important civil rights case had made national news just last month. The situation had just become much more complicated than a routine security stop. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as Gregory Mason, the head of airport security, stood before the handcuffed Judge Diane Powell. Mason was a tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a commanding presence, developed over 30 years in law enforcement. His eyes moved from the judge to the officers, then to the gathering crowd with their recording phones. "Officers, remove those handcuffs immediately," Mason ordered, his voice firm but controlled. Officer Kevin Martinez fumbled with the keys, his hands slightly shaking. "Sir, we were responding to a tip about a suspicious—" "Now, officer," Mason cut him off, pointing at the handcuffs. As Martinez removed the restraints, Diane rubbed her wrists. The metal had left red marks on her skin. She took a deep breath, fighting to maintain her composure. As a judge, she had seen countless cases of mistaken identity and racial profiling cross her bench. Now, she was living it firsthand. Judge Powell, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am for this incident, Mason said, handing Diane her fallen purse and wallet. I assure you this will be thoroughly investigated. Diane straightened her sweatshirt and looked Mason directly in the eyes. What happened here goes beyond a simple mistake, Mr. Mason. I was targeted, handcuffed, and publicly humiliated without cause. By now the crowd had grown to over 30 people. Some were openly recording the situation while others whispered among themselves. A few airport employees had also stopped to watch the scene unfold. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, Mason suggested, glancing nervously at the crowd. No, Diane said firmly. There's nothing private about what just happened to me. I was publicly detained, so I believe this conversation should remain public as well. A middle-aged woman stepped forward from the crowd. I saw the whole thing. These officers were completely out of line. She held up her phone. I have it all on video. So do I, said another bystander, a college-aged man in a university hoodie. And I heard the female officer make a racist comment. Officer Lisa Benson's face turned pale. I didn't. That's not what I meant. You said you people always make things difficult, Diane quoted, her voice steady. I'd be very interested to know exactly who you people refers to. Benson stared at the floor, unable to meet Diane's gaze. Mason turned to the crowd. Please, everyone. We appreciate your concern, but we need to clear this area. The airport has protocols for these situations. Protocols for racial profiling? Sam Washington, the retired police officer who had first recognized Diane's judicial badge, stepped forward. I spent 30 years on the force, and what I just witnessed was textbook discrimination. These officers made assumptions based solely on appearance, escalated without cause, and used excessive force against a cooperative citizen. The crowd murmured in agreement. Someone in the back shouted, "Shame on you!" Mason raised his hands. Please, everyone remain calm. Judge Powell, I understand your flight is boarding soon. Let me personally escort you to your gate while my deputy takes statements from witnesses. Diane checked her watch. Her flight would begin boarding in just 10 minutes. As much as she wanted to press the issue right now, she also needed to make it to Washington, D.C. for tomorrow's conference. I need your assurance that this incident will be properly addressed, Diane said to Mason. I want the names and badge numbers of these officers, and I expect to receive copies of all reports filed about this incident. Of course, Judge Powell, Mason nodded. You have my word. A woman in an airport management suit approached quickly. Judge Powell, we've informed your airline of the situation. They're holding the flight for you, and we've upgraded you to first class. It's the least we can do. Diane nodded but didn't smile. Thank you, but special treatment after the fact doesn't address the underlying problem. Officer Martinez stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. Judge Powell, I want to apologize personally. I should have handled this differently. Diane looked at him for a long moment. Officer Martinez, your apology means little if you don't understand why your actions were wrong. This wasn't just about mistaken identity. This was about how quickly you escalated to physical restraint when dealing with a black woman who simply asked why she was being detained. Martinez looked away, unable to meet her gaze. I would like to know exactly what tip led to my detention, Diane continued, addressing both officers. What specific suspicious behavior was I reported for? Officer Benson cleared her throat. We received information about a suspicious woman matching your general description from Terminal B security. My general description? Diane repeated. You mean a black woman in casual clothes? It was more specific than that, Martinez interjected. Black pants, blue top, pulling a small suitcase. Do you realize how many travelers in this airport match that description right now? Diane asked, gesturing around the terminal where several other passengers in similar attire could be seen. Yet you chose to stop me, and only me. Neither officer had a response. Sam Washington, who had remained nearby, spoke up again. In my experience, vague tips like that are often used to justify stops that wouldn't otherwise have probable cause. It's a common tactic. Mason shot Washington an annoyed look, then turned back to Diane. Judge Powell, we should get you to your gate. I promise you this will be fully investigated. As they began walking toward the gate, several passengers followed, some still recording with their phones. One woman approached Diane and handed her a business card. I'm Carol Bennett, attorney with the ACLU, she said quietly. If you want to pursue this matter, I'd be happy to help. Diane took the card and nodded her thanks. As a federal judge, she had significant legal resources at her disposal, but the offer of support touched her. They reached the gate just as first-class boarding was announced. Mason spoke briefly with the gate agent, who nodded sympathetically toward Diane. Judge Powell, your seat is ready whenever you're prepared to board, the agent said. Diane turned to Mason one last time. Mr. Mason, what happened today is not an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern that plays out every day across this country. The only difference is that most people who experience this treatment don't have a federal judge's badge to protect them. Mason nodded solemnly. I understand, Your Honor. Do you? Diane asked. Because understanding requires action. I expect to see meaningful changes in how your officers are trained and how they interact with the public. You have my word that this will be addressed, Mason said. Diane looked at him skeptically. Words are easy, Mr. Mason. I'll be watching for actions. As she prepared to board, Diane noticed several passengers had their phones out, typing rapidly. One younger woman looked up and caught Diane's eye. It's already trending on Twitter, she said. People are sharing the videos with then-honored Judge Diane Powell. Diane hadn't considered how quickly this incident would spread on social media. As a judge, she typically maintained a low public profile, focusing on her work rather than publicity. Now, it seemed her experience would be thrust into the national spotlight whether she wanted it or not. As she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, Diane thought about the speech she was scheduled to give tomorrow at the judicial conference. She had planned to talk about the importance of impartiality and fairness in the legal system. Now she realized she had a much more powerful and personal story to tell. Diane settled into her first-class seat and closed her eyes. Her wrists still ached from the handcuffs, a physical reminder of what had just happened. She took out her phone and saw several missed calls and messages from colleagues who had somehow already heard about the incident. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Diane made a decision. What happened to her today wouldn't be swept under the rug or settled quietly. She would use her position and voice to ensure that real change came from this humiliating experience. There were thousands of others who faced similar treatment every day without the privilege of a judge's badge to protect them. For them, Diane decided she would speak up and demand accountability. Diane Powell stared out the airplane window as the Atlanta skyline grew smaller beneath her. The past hour had been a blur of emotions: anger, humiliation, and a deep sense of injustice. Her phone continued to buzz with notifications, but she ignored them for now. She needed time to process what had happened. Across the aisle, a businessman in a gray suit kept glancing her way. Finally, he leaned over. Excuse me, but aren't you the judge from the video that's going viral? The one who was handcuffed at the airport? Diane was surprised. That quickly, the man nodded and held up his phone. It's all over social media. 3 different videos from different angles. Over 50,000 shares already. Diane took the phone and watched one of the videos. The footage was clear, showing her being handcuffed while calmly asking why she was being detained. She could hear Officer Benson's "You people" comment clearly on the recording. The video ended with the airport security chief apologizing to her. May I? Diane asked, scrolling to read some of the comments. Of course, the man said. The comment section was filled with outrage. Many people shared their own stories of being racially profiled at airports, train stations, and shopping malls. Others demanded the officers be fired immediately. A few defenders of the police claimed they were just doing their jobs, but they were heavily outnumbered. Diane handed the phone back. Thank you. No, thank you. the man said sincerely. My daughter is in law school and she wants to become a judge someday. She's going to be inspired by how you handled yourself. Diane managed a small smile. What's your daughter's name? Alicia, he said proudly. She's at Georgetown Law. Tell Alicia I said to keep working hard. The justice system needs good people, with strong principles. As the flight attendant came by with drinks, Diane finally checked her own phone. There were missed calls from her clerk, several colleagues, and even the chief judge of her circuit. She had text messages from friends and family who had somehow already heard about the incident, and there was an email from the Atlanta Airport Authority marked urgent. Diane opened the email first. Judge Powell, on behalf of the entire Atlanta International Airport Authority, I wish to extend our deepest apologies for the inexcusable treatment you received today. We have placed Officers Martinez and Benson on immediate administrative leave, pending a full investigation. We would welcome the opportunity to meet with you at your earliest convenience to discuss this matter and the steps we are taking to ensure nothing like this happens again. Most sincerely, Patricia Alvarez, Executive Director, Atlanta International Airport Authority. Next, Diane listened to a voicemail from Chief Judge Harold Montgomery, her superior on the federal bench. Diane, I've just seen the videos from Atlanta. This is absolutely outrageous. I've already called the Attorney General and the head of the TSA. Call me as soon as you land, and don't worry about your speech tomorrow. Take all the time you need. As Diane was about to respond to some messages, her phone rang. It was her clerk, Jordan. Judge Powell, are you okay? I've been trying to reach you. I'm fine, Jordan, Diane said, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. Just a bit shaken. It's everywhere, Judge. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News is covering. They're all looking for statements from you. Diane sighed. I'm not ready to make any public statements yet. I need to think about how to approach this. Of course, Jordan said. But there's something else you should know. People are digging into Officers Martinez and Benson's histories. Someone found that Benson has had 3 previous complaints about racial profiling, all dismissed by Internal Affairs. And Martinez was involved in a controversial arrest last year at a different airport. This information didn't surprise Diane, but it saddened her. This is bigger than just what happened to me, Jordan. Exactly. That's why people are responding so strongly. You're a federal judge who was racially profiled. It makes people wonder what happens to ordinary citizens with no power or connections. Diane thought about that for a moment. Has anyone from the Atlanta Police Department or the airport made any public statements? Yes, both issued standard "we're investigating" statements. But social media isn't accepting that. People are demanding immediate action. After finishing her call with Jordan, Diane decided to read some of the news coverage. The headlines were attention-grabbing. Federal judge handcuffed at airport in apparent case of racial profiling. Judge Diane Powell. I was targeted because I'm black. Airport police under fire after handcuffing federal judge. One conservative news site had a different angle. Airport security incident. Were officers just following protocol? Diane put down her phone and closed her eyes. The quiet hum of the airplane helped calm her thoughts. This incident was quickly becoming more than just a personal experience. It was turning into a national conversation about race, law enforcement, and justice, subjects she dealt with every day in her courtroom. When the plane landed in Washington, D.C., Diane was surprised to see 3 airport officials waiting for her at the gate. A woman in a TSA uniform stepped forward. Judge Powell, I'm Director Susan Miller with TSA. We wanted to personally ensure you had no issues at our airport. We've arranged a private escort to take you directly to your car or taxi, whichever you prefer. Diane appreciated the gesture, but couldn't help noting the irony. Thank you, Director Miller, but I don't need special treatment. What I need is for all travelers to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their title or position. Director Miller nodded uncomfortably. Of course, Your Honor. Still, there are several reporters outside who have heard you were on this flight. We thought you might appreciate a more private exit. That changed things. Diane wasn't ready to face cameras and microphones yet, In that case, I would appreciate the escort, thank you. As they walked through a staff-only corridor, Director Miller spoke again. Judge Powell, I want you to know that we at TSA are taking this very seriously. We're already reviewing our training protocols and bias awareness programs. I'm glad to hear that, Diane said. But I hope you understand that this isn't just about training. It's about a culture that views certain people as automatically suspicious. They reached a side door where a black SUV was waiting. Your hotel has been informed of your arrival, Judge Powell. Again, on behalf of the entire Department of Homeland Security, I apologize for your experience in Atlanta. Once in the SUV, Diane finally had a moment of true privacy. She leaned back against the seat and let out a long breath. Then she called. Her parents. Her father answered on the second ring. Diane, we've been watching the news. Are you all right, baby girl? Hearing her father's concerned voice brought tears to Diane's eyes for the first time since the incident. I'm okay, Dad. Really. Your mother and I are so angry about what they did to you, but we're also proud of how you handled it. I keep thinking about all the talks we had when I was growing up, Diane said softly. All the warnings about how to act if I was ever stopped by police. We had those talks to keep you safe, her father said. Never thought my daughter, the federal judge, would need to use those lessons. That's just it, Dad. Being a judge didn't protect me in that moment. When those officers looked at me, they didn't see Judge Powell. They just saw... I know, baby, her father said gently. I know. After speaking with her parents, Diane called Chief Judge Montgomery and assured him she would be ready for her speech tomorrow. Then she called Jordan back and asked him to make one change to her prepared remarks. I'm not going to give the speech we planned, Diane explained. I need to talk about what happened today and what it means for our justice system. I think that's the right call, Judge, Jordan said. People need to hear from you directly. As the SUV pulled up to her hotel, Diane noticed several news vans parked outside. Word had gotten out about where she was staying. The driver looked at her questioningly. It's okay, Diane said. I'm ready to face them. As she stepped out of the vehicle, reporters rushed forward with microphones and cameras. Questions flew at her from all directions. Judge Powell, can you tell us what happened in Atlanta? Do you believe you were racially profiled? Will you be filing a lawsuit against the airport police? What should happen to the officers involved? Diane held up her hand and surprisingly the crowd quieted. Years of commanding a courtroom had given her a natural authority. I will be making a full statement tomorrow at the Federal Judicial Conference, she said clearly. What happened to me today is not just about one judge or two police officers. It's about a system that needs to change. That's all I have to say for now, thank you. With that, Diane walked into the hotel, her head held high. Tomorrow she would tell her story, not just as federal judge Diane Powell, but as a black woman in America who, despite her position and power, was still not immune to the bias that affected so many others. And for the first time since the handcuffs had closed around her wrists, Diane felt a sense of purpose rising above her anger and hurt. Perhaps this painful experience could become a powerful catalyst for change. The grand ballroom of the Washington Plaza Hotel was packed to capacity the next morning. The annual Federal Judicial Conference normally attracted little attention outside legal circles, but today was different. News of Judge Diane Powell's experience had spread like wildfire, and now journalists from every major network crowded the back of the room. Hotel staff had to bring in extra chairs to accommodate everyone. Diane sat quietly at the head table, reviewing her notes one last time. She had been up most of the night rewriting her speech. Her original talk on judicial impartiality now seemed far less important than addressing what had happened to her and what it meant for the justice system as a whole. Chief Judge Harold Montgomery approached and took the seat beside her. He was in his 60s with thick white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. How are you holding up, Diane? I'm okay, Harold. Just focused on getting through this speech. He patted her hand. The entire judiciary stands behind you. What happened yesterday was inexcusable. Diane nodded gratefully. Thank you. That means a lot. At exactly 9 a.m., Chief Judge Montgomery stood and walked to the podium. The room fell. silent. Distinguished colleagues, honored guests, members of the press. We gather each year to discuss matters of law and justice, to share ideas, and to strengthen our commitment to the principles that guide our courts. Today we have an even more compelling reason to examine those principles. He looked directly at Diane. Yesterday, one of our most respected colleagues, Judge Diane Powell of the United States Court of Appeals, experienced firsthand the kind of injustice that too many Americans face every day. Judge Powell was racially profiled, detained without cause, and handcuffed in public simply for existing while black. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several judges shook their heads in disgust. "Cannot think of a more powerful reminder of why our work matters," Montgomery continued. Judge Powell was scheduled to deliver our keynote address on judicial impartiality. In light of yesterday's events, she has prepared different remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Judge Diane Powell. The room erupted in applause as Diane approached the podium. She stood tall in her black judicial robe, her expression composed and determined. She waited for the room to quiet before speaking. "Thank you, Chief Judge Montgomery. Good morning, everyone." Diane's voice was clear and steady. 24 hours ago, I was standing in the Atlanta International Airport, my hands cuffed behind my back, being treated like a criminal. Not because of anything I had done, but because of how I looked. She paused, letting her words sink in. "Had planned to talk to you today about the importance of impartiality in our courts. But after yesterday, I realize we need to discuss something more fundamental. The reality that our justice system still treats people differently based on the color of their skin." Diane described the incident in detail, the vague tip that led to her being singled out, the officer's refusal to explain why she was being detained, and the immediate escalation to handcuffs when she merely asked questions. "What saved me was my judicial ID," she continued. "The moment they realized I was a federal judge, everything changed. Suddenly I was worthy of respect and apologies. But what about the thousands of people who don't have a federal judge's badge? Who speaks for them when they are humiliated, detained, or worse?" The room was completely silent now. Even the journalist had stopped typing, captivated by her words. As judges, we pride ourselves on being fair and impartial. We believe in equal justice under law. It's literally carved on the front of the Supreme Court building. But we cannot pretend that ideal is reality when Black Americans are still treated with automatic suspicion in airports, shopping malls, and traffic stops across this country. Diane gripped the sides of the podium. "Yesterday, I was reminded that my judicial robe does not protect me from racism. Being a federal judge did not prevent me from being handcuffed without cause. My education, my achievements, my position, none of it mattered in that moment when those officers saw only the color of my skin." She looked around the room, making eye contact with her colleagues. "Many of you have reached out to express shock and outrage at what happened to me. I appreciate your support more than I can say. But I ask you to consider this. If you are shocked by what happened to a federal judge, imagine how often this happens to ordinary citizens who have no platform, no power, and no recourse." Diane took a sip of water before continuing. "This morning, I received word that the 2 officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The Atlanta Airport Authority has issued a formal apology. News outlets are calling this a wake-up call about racial profiling." She shook her head. "But we've had wake-up calls before. What we need is real change, and that change must include our courts." For the next 15 minutes, Diane outlined specific steps the judiciary could take to address systemic bias, from examining sentencing disparities, to reviewing bail practices, to expanding diversity on the bench. "As judges, we cannot control what happens in every airport or on every street corner," she said. "But we can ensure that when people enter our courtrooms, they truly receive equal justice under law. We can acknowledge that bias exists in our system and work actively to eliminate it." As she neared the end of her speech, Diane's voice grew more passionate. "Yesterday, I experienced a painful reminder of the work still to be done in our country. But I stand before you today not as a victim, but as someone more determined than ever to use my position to make a difference." She looked directly into the television cameras at the back of the room. To everyone watching who has ever been profiled, stopped without cause, or made to feel less than because of who you are, I see you, I hear you, and I will fight for you. The room erupted in a standing ovation. Judges, lawyers, and even journalists rose to their feet, applauding for nearly 2 minutes. Several judges wiped tears from their eyes. As Diane returned to her seat, her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a text from Jordan, her clerk. "You're trending #1 on Twitter. The speech is being live-streamed everywhere. You're changing the conversation, Judge." After the conference session ended, Diane was surrounded by colleagues offering support. Some shared their own experiences with bias. Others asked how they could help advance the reforms she had proposed. A group of judges from various circuits agreed on the spot to form a task force to examine bias in judicial proceedings. They asked Diane to lead it, and she accepted. As Diane left the ballroom, she found a group of young black law students waiting in the lobby. They had come specifically to see her speak. "Judge Powell," one young woman said, stepping forward, "I'm Maya Williams from Howard Law School. We just wanted to thank you for speaking out. Seeing you stand up there in your judicial robe, speaking truth after what happened to you, it means everything to us." Diane looked at their eager, hopeful faces and felt a wave of emotion. "Thank you for being here," she said sincerely. "And thank you for pursuing careers in law despite knowing the challenges you'll face. We need you." After talking with the students and taking a photo with them, Diane headed back to her hotel room. She needed a moment of quiet before her next commitment, an interview with a national news program that had been scheduled for that afternoon. When she opened the door to her room, she found it filled with flower arrangements from supporters across the country. There were also stacks of messages from people who had experienced similar treatment and found hope in seeing her speak out. Diane sat on the edge of the bed and picked up one handwritten letter. It was from a black teenage girl in Chicago who wrote that seeing a federal judge face the same discrimination she experienced made her feel less alone. "I want to be a judge like you someday," the girl had written. "Thank you for showing me it's possible even though it's still hard." Diane held the letter to her chest and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the past 24 hours. Tears came, but they were different now. Not tears of humiliation or anger, but of purpose and determination. What had happened to her was painful, but it had also given her a powerful new platform, and she intended to use it. 6 months had passed since that fateful day at Atlanta International Airport. The summer heat had given way to autumn, and Judge Diane Powell stood at the podium in a brand new building on the outskirts of Atlanta. The sign above the entrance read Community Justice Training Center, and today was its grand opening. Diane looked out at the crowd gathered for the ceremony. There were police officers, community leaders, journalists, and ordinary citizens. In the front row sat her parents, beaming with pride. Next to them was Sam Washington, the retired police officer who had first recognized her judicial badge that day at the airport. "Thank you all for being here today," Diane began. 6 months ago, I was handcuffed and humiliated at the Atlanta airport because of how I looked. Today, we open a center dedicated to ensuring that kind of incident never happens again to anyone, regardless of their title or position. The months following the airport incident had been a whirlwind for Diane. Her speech at the judicial conference had gone viral, watched over 30 million times online. She had appeared on major news programs, written op-eds for leading newspapers, and testified before Congress about the realities of racial profiling. The Atlanta Airport Authority had eventually reached a settlement with Diane, but instead of keeping the money, she had used it to help fund this training center. The city of Atlanta, facing intense public pressure, had agreed to match her contribution. Several corporations had also donated, eager to be associated with positive change. This center will train law enforcement officers not just in proper procedures, but in recognizing and overcoming their own biases, Diane continued. But more importantly, it will bring officers together with the communities they serve to build understanding and trust between them. She gestured to a young black police cadet standing to her right. Officer Jamal Carter represents the first class of officers who will train here. He and his colleagues will learn from experts in bias recognition, de-escalation techniques, and community relations. Then she pointed to a middle-aged woman on her left. And this is Linda Mercer, a community advocate who will help lead our Civilian Oversight Committee. Together, people like Officer Carter and Ms. Mercer will work to create a new model of policing based on respect and partnership. As Diane spoke, she couldn't help thinking about Officers Martinez and Benson, the two who had handcuffed her. Both had eventually been fired after an investigation found multiple previous complaints against them. Officer Benson had given several angry interviews claiming she was being used as a scapegoat. Officer Martinez, however, had taken a different approach. Some of you may be surprised to see former Officer Kevin Martinez here today, Diane said, gesturing to a man standing quietly at the side of the stage. After losing his job, Kevin could have become bitter. Instead, he chose to reflect on his actions and the biases that led to them. Martinez stepped forward, looking nervous but determined. "I made a terrible mistake that day," he said simply. "I let assumptions guide my actions instead of proper procedure and basic human respect. I'm grateful to Judge Powell for allowing me to be part of this center, where I'll help train officers to recognize the kind of bias that led to my worst mistake." There was scattered applause as Martinez stepped back. Diane knew that including him in the program had been controversial. Some community members felt it sent the wrong message, but Diane had insisted that redemption and growth must be part of any lasting solution. "What happened to me that day at the airport was wrong," Diane continued. "But what matters now is what we do with that wrong. Do we simply punish the individuals involved and move on? Or do we use it as a catalyst for real systemic change?" She paused, looking out at the diverse faces before her. The easy part was getting angry. The hard part is channeling that anger into constructive action, and that's what this center represents. Not just a response to one incident, but a commitment to fundamentally changing how law enforcement and communities interact. After the ceremony, Diane mingled with guests at the reception. A young black girl about 12 years old approached her shyly. "Judge Powell, my name is Zoe. My mom brought me here today because she said you're changing things." Diane knelt down to the girl's level. "It's very nice to meet you, Zoe. I'm trying to change things, but it takes a lot of people working together." Zoe nodded. "Seriously. When I grow up, I want to be a judge like you." "You can be whatever you want to be, Zoe," Diane said, meaning every word. "And hopefully by the time you're grown, we'll have made things a little better for you." As Zoe returned to her mother, Diane noticed a familiar face approaching, Gregory Mason, the head of airport security, who had apologized to her that day. "Judge Powell," Mason said, extending his hand. "Congratulations on the center. It's impressive, what you've accomplished in just 6 months." "Thank you, Mr. Mason. How are things at the airport?" "Changed for the better, I hope," he said. "We've completely revamped our training procedures. Every officer has gone through intensive bias recognition training, and we've established a civilian review board that examines every complaint." Diane nodded appreciatively. "I'm glad to hear it. Have you seen any results yet?" "Complaints are down 30%, Mason said proudly. "And we're seeing more positive feedback from travelers of all backgrounds. It's a start." Later that evening, Diane had dinner with her parents at their home in Atlanta. Her mother had cooked all her childhood favorites: fried chicken, collard greens, mac and cheese, and sweet potato pie. "I'm so proud of you, baby," her father said, squeezing her hand across the table. "You took something terrible and turned it into something good." "I had good teachers," Diane said, smiling at both her parents. "You both taught me to stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it might be." Her mother wiped away a tear. "I just wish it hadn't taken something so awful happening to my baby girl to make people listen." "I know, Mom," Diane said softly. "But sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes people need to see injustice happen to someone they wouldn't expect, like a federal judge, before they believe it happens at all." After dinner, Diane checked her emails. There was one from her clerk, Jordan, with good news. The judicial task force she had formed had just released its first set of recommendations for addressing bias in the courts. Already, 3 circuit courts had agreed to implement them immediately. There was also an email from the law students she had met after her speech. They had formed a student organization dedicated to addressing bias in legal education and the legal system. They were now active on 15 law school campuses across the country. As Diane prepared for bed in her childhood room, she reflected on the past 6 months. The incident at the airport had been one of the most humiliating experiences of her life. Yet from that moment of injustice had come real, tangible progress. The new training center would help hundreds of officers recognize and overcome their biases. The changes at the airport would protect thousands of travelers from similar experiences. The judicial reforms would impact countless cases across the country. Diane thought about Zoe, the young girl who wanted to be a judge. She thought about the black law students fighting for change in their schools. She thought about Officer Carter and his fellow cadets, training to be a new kind of police officer. No, the work wasn't done. Racial bias wouldn't disappear overnight, or even in a decade. But something had shifted. A conversation had started that couldn't be stopped. People who had never acknowledged the problem were now confronting it directly. As she drifted off to sleep, Diane felt something she hadn't expected to feel when she was standing in handcuffs 6 months ago. Hope. Real, substantial hope that things could change, and that she could help make that change happen. In the morning, she would fly back to Washington to resume her duties on the federal bench. There were cases to hear, opinions to write, and justice to uphold. But now her work as a judge had taken on new meaning. Every fair ruling, every thoughtful opinion, every moment of true justice in her courtroom was another step toward the equal justice under law that America had long promised, but not yet fully delivered. The handcuffs that had once bound her wrists had now become the key to opening a door to a more just future for everyone.